I'm Marcus Thompson, 34 years old, and 3 weeks ago I received a text message that would change everything. It wasn't an invitation to our family's annual Easter celebration. Instead, it was a photo of my parents, my sister, and her wealthy husband sitting around an elegantly set table with the caption, "Easter blessings with those who truly understand our values." I wasn't in the photo. I wasn't even invited. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
The reason? According to my mother's voicemail the day before,
My financial situation would make the other guests uncomfortable. She was referring to the tech executives and investment bankers my sister Victoria married into. People who apparently couldn't dine with someone who drove a 10-year-old Honda and lived in a modest apartment. What my family didn't know was that, exactly 1 week later, I would own something that would shake their world to its core. Something that would force them to confront who they really were beneath their carefully constructed facade of righteousness. Growing up in Westfield, Connecticut should have been a blessing. Our neighborhood was the kind of place where lawns were always perfectly manicured, where every house looked like it belonged in a magazine spread for suburban success. The Thompsons lived in a sprawling colonial on Maple Ridge Drive, complete with a circular driveway and enough rooms that my sister and I never had to share space unless we wanted to. My father, Richard Thompson, built his reputation as the town's most successful real estate developer. His company, Thompson and Associates, was responsible for half the luxury developments in our county. Mother Patricia dedicated her life to charity work and social climbing, serving on boards for the hospital, the country club, and most importantly, St. Augustine Episcopal Church, where our family had attended for 3 generations. From the outside, we were the picture of American prosperity. Inside those walls, however, success was measured in dollars, connections, and social standing. Love came with conditions, and those conditions changed depending on your bank account. My earliest memory of understanding our family's true values happened when I was 8 years old. Victoria, then 11, had asked for a new bicycle for her birthday. Not just any bicycle, but a custom pink Schwinn that cost more than most families spent on groceries in a month. Without hesitation, our parents drove to the specialty bike shop in Hartford and purchased it, along with a matching helmet and accessories. 2 months later, when I asked for a simple skateboard for Christmas, I was told that 8-year-old needed to learn the value of money. I could have the skateboard, but only if I earned half the cost by doing extra chores around the house. The skateboard cost $45. Victoria's bike had cost over $600. The pattern continued. Throughout our childhood, Victoria received piano lessons from a conservatory-trained instructor while I was enrolled in group guitar classes at the community center. When she expressed interest in horseback riding, my parents bought her a membership at an exclusive equestrian club. When I wanted to join the school's soccer team, I was told the equipment and fees were unnecessary expenses. By high school, the disparity had become a chasm. Victoria attended Westfield Preparatory Academy, a private school that costs more per year than most people's salaries. The school was known for its connections to Ivy League universities and its student body of future leaders from Connecticut's wealthiest families. Meanwhile, I was enrolled at Westfield High, a perfectly adequate public school that my parents treated as if it were a personal embarrassment. The explanations for these differences were always carefully crafted. Victoria was academically gifted and needed specialized attention. I was naturally intelligent and would do fine anywhere. Victoria required cultural enrichment to develop her artistic talents. I was self-motivated and didn't need extra support to succeed. Every justification painted my sister as delicate and deserving while positioning me as hardy and capable of thriving without investment. What hurt most wasn't the money itself, but what it represented. Each decision communicated my parents' assessment of our respective worth. Victoria was the child they showcased, the one whose achievements reflected their success as parents. I was the afterthought, expected to succeed despite rather than because of their support. College applications revealed the depth of this philosophy. Victoria applied to 7 elite universities, with my parents hiring an expensive college consultant to craft her applications. They paid for SAT prep courses, essay, coaching, and campus visits to schools across the country. When she was accepted to Dartmouth, they celebrated with a family trip to Europe. I applied to 12 schools, researching each one on my own time and writing every essay without assistance. When I was accepted to the University of Connecticut, with a partial academic scholarship, my father's response was a nod and a comment about state schools being practical choices for practical students. The financial arrangements for our education told the complete story. Victoria's 4 years at Dartmouth, including room, board, and study abroad programs, cost my parents approximately $240,000. They paid every penny without complaint, often mentioning how proud they were to invest in her future. My education at UConn, even with the scholarship, required student loans. When I asked if they could help with the remaining costs, my mother suggested I consider working part-time to build character. During college, the differences in treatment became more sophisticated but no less obvious. Victoria received monthly allowances that covered not just necessities, but entertainment, clothing, and social activities. Her Instagram feed from those years shows a parade of ski trips, concerts, and restaurant meals with friends, all funded by what my parents called educational experiences. I worked 20 hours a week at the campus bookstore, while maintaining a full course load in computer science. When Victoria complained about her workload of 3 art history classes, our parents expressed concern about her stress levels. When I mentioned being tired from balancing work and school, I was reminded that hard work would serve me well in the real world. The summer before my senior year, Victoria secured an unpaid internship at a prestigious art gallery in Manhattan. My parents not only covered her living expenses in one of the city's most expensive neighborhoods, but also provided spending money for networking events and cultural activities. They spoke constantly about how the internship would open doors for her future career in arts administration. That same summer, I found a paid internship at a tech startup in Hartford. The position offered valuable experience in software development and could potentially lead to a full-time job after graduation. When I mentioned the opportunity, my father's only comment was that at least I wouldn't be asking them for money. The differences weren't limited to major life events. Birthday celebrations, holiday gifts, and even casual family dinners reflected the hierarchy my parents had established. Victoria's birthdays were events, complete with parties, elaborate gifts, and extended family gatherings. Mine were acknowledged with dinner at a mid-range restaurant and a gift card to Best Buy. During family gatherings, conversations naturally centered around Victoria's achievements, her social life, and her future plans. When relatives asked about my studies or goals, my parents would offer brief, polite responses before redirecting attention back to their favored daughter. It became clear that in their minds, I was the supporting actor in the family drama, while Victoria was the star. The most painful part wasn't the material inequality, though that stung. It was the emotional distance that grew from years of being treated as less valuable. I learned to expect less, to celebrate my achievements privately, and to build resilience because support wasn't guaranteed. I developed independence not by choice, but by necessity. By the time I graduated from college with a degree in computer science and immediately landed a position at a growing tech company, I had already begun to understand that my worth and my family would always be secondary. Victoria graduated with a liberal arts degree and no clear career path. Yet our parents spoke about her unlimited potential while treating my stable. So a well-paying job is merely adequate. The years that followed college reinforced these dynamics. Victoria moved back home while exploring her options, an arrangement my parents described as finding herself. She took art classes, traveled with friends, eventually landed a position at a nonprofit organization that paid barely above minimum wage. My parents supplemented her income and continued to support her lifestyle, calling it an investment in her passion. I moved to Hartford, rented a modest apartment, and began building my career in technology. Every promotion, every salary increase, every professional achievement was met with polite acknowledgement from my family, as if success in my field was expected rather than celebrated. The message was clear. I was supposed to succeed independently while Victoria deserved support in her journey toward success. When Victoria married David Ashford, Heir to a pharmaceutical fortune, the wedding became a year-long celebration of my parents' social ascension. The ceremony at the country club cost more than many people's houses, with no expense spared for their daughter's perfect day. I was included in the wedding party, but even there, the differences were obvious. Victoria's bridesmaids wore custom-designed gowns, while I purchased my groomsman tuxedo from a rental shop. The marriage elevated my parents' social status in ways that my professional achievements never could. Suddenly, they were invited to exclusive events, country club gatherings, and charity galas. Victoria and David's wealth opened doors that had previously been closed, and my parents embraced their new social circle with enthusiasm as my sister settled into married life in a mansion in Greenwich. Complete with household staff and luxury cars, my parents began to see the world through the lens of their new social environment. Money wasn't just about comfort anymore. It was about belonging to a class of people who measured worth in assets and connections. What my family failed to understand, or perhaps chose to ignore, was that while they were climbing social ladders through Victoria's marriage, I was quietly building something far more substantial in the tech world. But their perception of me remained frozen in time, seeing only the struggling college student who worked retail jobs, not the software architect who had spent the last decade revolutionizing data security systems. After graduation, I joined Meridian Technologies, a mid-sized firm specializing in cybersecurity solutions for financial institutions. The work was challenging and exactly what I had hoped for. Developing encryption protocols that would protect millions of transactions daily. My supervisor, Elena Rodriguez, quickly recognized my potential and became both a mentor and advocate for my advancement within the company. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Within 18 months, I had been promoted to senior developer, leading a team of 6 programmers on projects that secured contracts with major banks throughout New England. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was protecting the digital assets of institutions where my family's new social circle conducted their business. Yet my parents viewed my career as merely working with computers. During family dinners, when I attempted to share news about successful product launches or patent applications, my father would nod politely before redirecting the conversation to Victoria's latest charity event or David's business ventures. My mother would occasionally ask if I was still enjoying the computer work, as if technology was a hobby rather than a rapidly evolving industry worth billions of dollars. The disconnect became particularly evident during holiday gatherings. With extended family, Victoria would regale relatives with stories of their recent vacation to the Hamptons or their membership at an exclusive yacht club, while I found myself explaining what cybersecurity meant to cousins who seemed genuinely confused about why banks would need computer protection. My achievements were technical and abstract, difficult to quantify at dinner parties where success was measured in vacation destinations and luxury purchases. By my 3rd year at Meridian, I developed a proprietary algorithm that could detect fraudulent transactions in real time, something that had never been accomplished with such accuracy and speed. The technology was groundbreaking, but when I tried to explain its significance to my family, their eyes would glaze over. My father's response was typically, "That sounds very technical, Marcus. I'm sure it's important in your field." Meanwhile, Victoria's decision to redecorate her dining room warranted a 2-hour family discussion, complete with fabric samples and paint swatches passed around the table. The $50,000 renovation budget was discussed with the same enthusiasm that my parents had once reserved for planning European vacations. When I mentioned that my algorithm had the potential to save financial institutions millions in fraud losses, the conversation lasted exactly 4 minutes before shifting to Victoria's upcoming dinner party. The pattern extended beyond career achievements to personal relationships and lifestyle choices. When Victoria and David purchased their second home, a ski chalet in Vermont, my parents flew up to tour the property and spent weeks showing photographs to anyone who would look. When I bought my first home, a modest 3-bedroom colonial in a quiet Hartford suburb, my mother's comment was, "How practical, dear. Perfect for someone just starting out." I was 31 years old and had been successfully employed for nearly a decade. But in my family's perception, I was perpetually just starting out, while Victoria, despite being financially dependent on her husband's family wealth, was viewed as having arrived in life. Dating presented another opportunity for my family to demonstrate their priorities. Victoria's relationships had always been celebrated and analyzed in detail. When she began dating David during her final year of college, my parents immediately embraced him, inviting him to family events and treating him like the son they had always wanted. His family's wealth and social connections made him the perfect match in their eyes, and they actively encouraged the relationship. My dating life, by contrast, was treated with polite disinterest. When I brought Sarah Chen, a brilliant software engineer I had met at a technology conference, to a family barbecue, my parents were cordial but distant. Sarah held 2 patents in machine learning and had been featured in TechCrunch for her innovative work in artificial intelligence, but these accomplishments meant nothing to my family. She didn't come from money, didn't wear designer clothes, and couldn't contribute to conversations about country clubs or luxury travel. After Sarah and I had been dating for 6 months, my mother pulled me aside during a family dinner to express her concerns. "She seems very nice, Marcus, but are you sure she's the right fit? You want someone who can keep up with your ambitions?" The irony was staggering. Sarah's ambitions far exceeded anything my family could comprehend. But because she wasn't connected to their social circle, she was viewed as inadequate. The breaking point in that relationship came during Victoria's birthday celebration at the country club. My parents had reserved the private dining room, and the guest list read like a who's who of Connecticut's social elite. Sarah felt completely out of place among the pharmaceutical executives, investment bankers, and their wives who spoke exclusively about private schools, vacation homes, and charity galas. Halfway through the evening, I overheard my mother explaining to another guest why I had brought the Asian girl instead of someone more suitable for the family. The casual racism and complete dismissal of Sarah's achievements was more than I could tolerate. We left early, and though Sarah never directly blamed my family for our eventual breakup, the incident had shown her exactly what she would be marrying into if our relationship became serious. Professional success continued to elude my family's notice even as my career accelerated. At 29, I was promoted to Chief Technology Officer at Meridian, making me the youngest executive in the company's history. The position came with a substantial salary increase, equity options, and responsibility for all technological innovation within the firm. My parents' reaction was to ask if the new title meant I would have to work longer hours. That same month, Victoria announced that she had been elected to the board of the Greenwich Arts Council, an unpaid position that required her to attend monthly meetings and help plan fundraising events. My parents were ecstatic, calling friends and relatives to share the news of their daughter's important appointment. The contrast was jarring. My promotion to a leadership role at a multi-million-dollar company warranted a congratulatory text message, while Victoria's volunteer position inspired a celebration dinner. The technology sector was experiencing unprecedented growth during these years, and cybersecurity had become one of the most critical and lucrative specializations in the field. Companies were being valued at billions of dollars. Skilled professionals were commanding salaries that rivaled those of investment bankers and corporate attorneys. Yet my family remained convinced that real success happened in boardrooms and country clubs, not in server rooms and innovation labs. When Meridian was acquired by Tech Global Industries for $2.8 billion, my equity options suddenly became worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. The acquisition made front-page news in the Hartford Business Journal and was covered extensively in trade publications. My parents' response was to clip the newspaper article and mail it to me with a note saying, "Thought you'd like to see this write-up about your company." They completely missed the significance of my role in the acquisition or the financial implications for my personal situation. As CTO, I had been instrumental in developing the intellectual property that made Meridian attractive to Tech Global. My algorithms and security protocols were specifically mentioned in the acquisition announcement as key assets. Yet my family viewed the entire event as something that happened to me rather than something I had helped create. The pattern of dismissal extended to my living situation and lifestyle choices. while Victoria and David were purchasing their third luxury vehicle, a Tesla Model S that my father enthusiastically test drove. I continued driving my reliable Honda Civic. My decision to prioritize savings and investments over conspicuous consumption was interpreted as inability to afford better rather than deliberate financial strategy. When I finally decided to upgrade my car, purchasing a modest BMW sedan, my mother's comment was, "Finally treating yourself to something nice." She seemed unable to comprehend that I could have afforded something far more expensive, but had chosen practicality over prestige. My financial decisions were consistently misinterpreted through the lens of their assumptions about my limited resources. Holiday gift exchanges provided annual reminders of my family's perception hierarchy. Victoria received jewelry, designer handbags, and luxury items that reflected both expensive taste and intimate knowledge of her preferences. My gifts were typically gift cards, practical items, or generic presents that could have been purchased for anyone. The message was clear. Victoria's happiness was worth investing in. While my satisfaction was an afterthought, the most painful aspect wasn't the monetary value of the gifts, but the lack of thought they represented. Victoria's presence showed that my parents paid attention to her interests, her style, and her desires. My gifts suggested they knew almost nothing about my actual life, my hobbies, or my aspirations. After years of receiving gift cards despite never expressing interest in consumer electronics, I began to understand that they weren't really seeing me at all. This dynamic created a strange parallel existence, where my professional life was thriving while my family relationships remained stunted. Colleagues respected my expertise, sought my advice on complex technical problems, and valued my leadership. Industry conferences invited me to speak about innovation in cybersecurity. Trade publications interviewed me about emerging threats and solutions. Yet within my family, I remained the afterthought, the practical son who worked with computers. While his sister lived the life they had always envisioned for successful people, as Easter approached last year, I had been contemplating how to bridge this gap between my actual success and my family's perception of my life. The acquisition had left me with substantial wealth, but revealing this fact felt complicated. Would they suddenly begin treating me differently because of money? Would their newfound respect be genuine or merely transactional? These questions were about to become irrelevant, as my family was preparing to make a decision that would force me to confront our relationship in ways I had never imagined. The months leading up to Easter began with what should have been the happiest period of my professional life. Tech Global had offered me a position as Senior Vice President of Cybersecurity Innovation, overseeing security protocols for their entire global network. The role came with a seven-figure salary, a team of over 200 specialists across 4 continents, and the kind of responsibility that most people spend entire careers working toward. At 34, I was being entrusted with protecting the digital infrastructure of one of the world's largest technology companies. My first week involved meetings with government agencies, consultations with international banks, and strategy sessions about defending against state-sponsored cyber attacks. The weight of responsibility was immense, but it was exactly the challenge I had been preparing for throughout my career. My office on the 42nd floor of Tech Global's Hartford headquarters overlooked the Connecticut River, with floor-to-ceiling windows that made the morning commute feel like ascending to another world. The executive parking garage housed Maseratis, Porsches, and vehicles worth more than most people's homes. Yet I continued driving my Honda Civic, partly out of habit and partly because the car had become a symbol of my authentic self in a world increasingly focused on appearances. The irony of my situation wasn't lost on me. During the day, I made decisions affecting millions of users worldwide, managed budgets larger than most cities, and consulted with CEOs of Fortune 500 companies about their most sensitive security concerns. In the evenings, I returned to my modest colonial house, ordered takeout from the local Chinese restaurant, and spent weekends reading technical journals or hiking alone through Connecticut's state parks. My wealth had grown substantially, but my lifestyle remained deliberately understated. The acquisition windfall, combined with my new salary and equity packages, meant I could afford virtually anything. Instead, I invested aggressively, purchased real estate through limited liability companies, and built a portfolio that would ensure financial independence for multiple generations. Money had become a tool for security and opportunity rather than display. This financial transformation remained completely invisible to my family. When I attended Victoria's elaborate baby shower in January, celebrating her pregnancy with David's first child, I brought a thoughtful but modestly priced gift from the registry. Victoria received a $3,000 stroller system from my parents, professional photography services for maternity portraits, and enough designer baby clothes to outfit a dozen children. My contribution was acknowledged with the same polite thanks as gifts from distant cousins. The baby shower conversation centered around preparation for their child's future. David discussed plans for private school enrollment, beginning with a waiting list at Greenwich's most exclusive preschool that required a $10,000 deposit for children not yet born. My parents enthusiastically supported these preparations, offering to contribute toward education costs and discussing the advantages of early investment in premium educational opportunities. Listening to these conversations, I found myself mentally calculating the costs they were discussing so casually. The proposed private school education, from preschool through high school graduation, cost approximately $400,000. Summer camps, tutoring, and enrichment activities would add another $100,000. My parents spoke about these expenses as natural investments, never questioning whether such sums might be better allocated or whether their enthusiasm might create pressure for the unborn child. Meanwhile, my own financial situation had evolved to the point where I could easily fund such expenses for multiple children without impacting my lifestyle. Yet my family's assumptions about my resources remained unchanged. When my mother mentioned that they hoped I would be able to contribute something toward my future niece or nephew's college fund, suggested that even $50 or $100 per month would be meaningful. Her tone suggested she was being generous and not expecting more from someone in my circumstances. The conversation at that baby shower marked a turning point in my awareness of how fundamentally my family misunderstood my life. They continued to operate under assumptions formed during my college years, unnebly or unwilling to recognize that my situation had changed dramatically. More troubling was their apparent comfort with this arrangement, as if my perceived financial limitations justified their continued dismissal of my achievements and potential contributions. February brought news that should have commanded my family's attention, but instead passed virtually unnoticed. Tech Global announced that my security protocols had prevented a massive cyber attack targeting financial institutions across North America. The attempted breach could have compromised personal data for over 50 million banking customers and potentially disrupted financial markets. My team's early detection and response prevented what cybersecurity experts called the most sophisticated attack in the industry's history. The story made headlines in major newspapers, technology publications, and financial journals. I was interviewed by CNN, quoted in the Wall Street Journal, invited to testify before a congressional subcommittee about cybersecurity threats. The incident established me as one of the most recognized experts in my field, with speaking invitations pouring in from conferences worldwide and consulting offers from companies seeking to improve their security infrastructure. My parents' awareness of these developments came through a brief mention in our local newspaper, which ran a small item about a Hartford area executive helping to prevent cybercrime. When my mother called to ask if the article was referring to me, her tone suggested mild curiosity rather than pride or excitement. After confirming that yes, I had been involved in preventing the attack, she quickly shifted the conversation to Victoria's baby registry and whether I had seen any items I might want to purchase. The disconnect was profound. Media outlets were describing me as a cybersecurity visionary, an industry leader, while my family remained convinced that I worked in basic technical support. Even direct evidence of my prominence in national news failed to update their perception of my professional standing or capabilities. This pattern accelerated as Easter approached. March brought a series of professional milestones that should have been impossible to ignore. I was named to Fortune magazine's 40 Under 40 list, recognizing young leaders making significant impacts in their industries. The accompanying article detailed my role in developing next-generation security protocols and highlighted my rapid rise from college. Graduate to C-suite executive at one of America's largest technology companies. Tech Global's quarterly earnings call specifically mentioned my division's contributions to company growth, with the CEO publicly crediting my team's innovations for securing several billion-dollar contracts with government agencies and international corporations. Industry analysts projected that my security technologies would generate over $500 million in annual revenue for the company. It's making me one of their most valuable executives. Yet when I mentioned the Fortune recognition during a family dinner, my father's response was to joke about 40 under 40 what? Before immediately asking Victoria about her doctor's appointment and whether the baby was developing normally. The conversation about my national recognition lasted approximately 30 seconds before shifting to discussion of nursery furniture that would occupy the next hour. The systematic dismissal of my achievements was becoming impossible to attribute to oversight or misunderstanding. My family had access to the same information as everyone else, yet they consistently chose to minimize or ignore evidence that contradicted their established narrative about my life. Their investment in viewing me as the struggling younger son had become so complete that contradictory facts couldn't penetrate their perception. Professional recognition brought social invitations that further illustrated the gap between my actual life and my family's assumptions. Industry events in major cities, exclusive conferences at luxury resorts, and networking dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants had become routine parts of my calendar. I found myself dining with tech billionaires, consulting with government officials, and speaking to audiences of thousands at major conventions. These experiences were surreal partly because they remained completely separate from my family relationships. I could spend Tuesday evening advising the Department of Homeland Security about cybersecurity strategy, then attend Victoria's baby shower on Saturday, where relatives asked if I was still working with computers and suggested I consider pursuing a more stable career path. The social circles were incompatible in ways that went beyond simple wealth differences. My professional world valued innovation, intellectual achievement, and technical expertise. My family's social environment prioritized traditional markers of success, inherited wealth, social connections, and conformity to established hierarchies. These value systems created parallel universes that rarely intersected. As March progressed toward Easter, my family's excitement about the holiday focused entirely on introducing Victoria's pregnancy to their extended social circle. The celebration had grown from a family dinner to a major social event, with guest lists including David's business associates, country club friends, prominent members of St. Augustine Episcopal Church, where my parents had become increasingly prominent donors and volunteers. My mother spent weeks planning a menu that would impress their sophisticated guests, hiring a catering service that specialized in events for Connecticut's elite families. The house underwent extensive preparation, with professional cleaning services, floral arrangements, and enough luxury touches to transform their already impressive home into something worthy of a magazine spread. These preparations were discussed in detail during family phone calls, with my mother sharing her excitement about entertaining such distinguished guests. The conversation inevitably included references to my need to dress appropriately for the occasion and suggestions that I might want to practice conversation topics that would be suitable for such refined company. The implication was clear. I was expected to perform respectability rather than simply be myself. The guest list had expanded too, include several families whose wealth and social standing exceeded even David's connections. Banking executives, pharmaceutical, industry leaders, and old money families who had summered in the Hamptons for generations would be joining our traditional family celebration. My parents were clearly thrilled to host such impressive company, viewing the event as confirmation of their successful social ascension through Victoria's marriage. What they didn't anticipate was that this carefully curated guest list would include people who knew exactly who I was professionally. Several attendees were executives at financial institutions that used Tech Global's security services. While others had read my interviews in business publications or attended conferences where I had been a featured speaker, the stage was being set for a revelation that would shatter my family's comfortable assumptions about social hierarchies and professional achievement. The call came on a Thursday evening, exactly 10 days before Easter. I was reviewing security protocols for a new government contract when my phone displayed my mother's contact information. These calls had become increasingly rare over the years, usually reserved for family emergencies or requests for technical support with their electronic devices. The timing felt unusual, as our family typically communicated through group texts or during scheduled Sunday conversations. "Marcus, darling, how are you?" Her voice carried that artificially bright tone she used when delivering news she expected might be unwelcome. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." I minimized the classified documents on my computer screen and gave her my attention. "Not at all, Mom. What's going on?" "Well, I wanted to talk to you about Easter this year. We're doing something a little different, and I thought it would be better to discuss it now rather than wait until the last minute." The phrase "something a little different" immediately triggered my attention. Our family's Easter celebration had followed the same format for over 2 decades. Church service at St. Augustine, followed by dinner at my parents' house with extended family and close friends. The consistency had been one of the few reliable aspects of our family traditions. "Different how?" I asked, though something in her tone already suggested where this conversation was headed. "Well, you know how Victoria is expecting, and David's family has become so important to our social circle. This year we're hosting some very prominent people, business leaders and sophisticated individuals who are used to a certain level of refinement." She paused, clearly struggling with how to phrase whatever came next. "The thing is, Marcus, we're concerned that having too many people might make the conversation awkward. These are successful individuals who move in very elevated circles, and we want to ensure everyone feels comfortable." The euphemisms were flowing freely, but the underlying message was becoming clear. "Are you saying I'm not invited to Easter dinner?" "Oh, darling, it's not that you're not invited. It's just that this year's gathering is really more of a business and social networking event. These people are used to discussing investments, luxury travel, country club memberships, that sort of thing. We thought you might feel out of place." The audacity was breathtaking. My mother was essentially arguing that I lacked the sophistication to dine with their guests, people who were presumably more successful and refined than I could ever hope to be. The irony was so profound it was almost amusing. "Mom, can you be more specific about what you're concerned about? What exactly do you think would happen if I attended?" Another pause, longer this time. "Well, you know how you are, dear. You're so focused on your computer work, and these people talk about things like vacation homes in Martha's Vineyard, private equity investments, yacht clubs. We just don't want you to feel uncomfortable when you can't contribute to those conversations." The picture became clearer with each word. My parents had convinced themselves that wealth and sophistication were synonymous, and that anyone without obvious displays of luxury couldn't possibly relate to truly successful people. They were protecting me from embarrassment by excluding me from conversations they assumed I couldn't understand. "I see. And who exactly is attending this sophisticated gathering?" She brightened immediately, clearly relieved to shift toward more positive territory. "It's going to be wonderful. David's business partner Harrison Blackwell and his wife will be there, along with the Sutherlands from the country club. Margaret Sutherland sits on the hospital board with me, and her husband owns that chain of luxury car dealerships, the Cromwells. Are coming too. He's a partner at that prestigious law firm downtown, and she runs the charity auction for the Arts Council." She continued listing names, each one accompanied by descriptions of wealth, social position, or professional prominence. The guest list read like a directory of Connecticut's business elite, exactly the kind of people my parents hoped to impress through their association with Victoria and David's social circle. Then there's Jonathan Pierce from Greenwich. He's in banking, very high level, and Dr. Amanda Foster, who runs the private medical practice that all the prominent families use. Oh, and Richard Worthington, who owns several restaurants in Fairfield County. Really accomplished people, you understand? What my mother couldn't have known was that I was personally acquainted with at least half the names on her list. Jonathan. Pierce's bank was one of Tech Global's largest clients. I had consulted with their board of directors about cybersecurity infrastructure just 6 months earlier. Dr. Foster had attended a healthcare technology conference where I was the keynote speaker discussing data protection for medical practices. Richard Worthington's restaurant management company used security software my team had designed to protect customer payment information. These people didn't just know who I was professionally. Several of them had specifically sought my expertise and paid substantial consulting fees for my services. The idea that I would be intellectually or socially out of place among them was not just wrong, it was completely backwards. What about Victoria? How does she feel about me not being included? Victoria understands completely. She knows how important this is for David's business relationships and our social standing. She actually suggested that you might prefer to spend Easter somewhere more comfortable, maybe with friends who share your interests. The manipulation was expertly crafted. Victoria, the beloved daughter, had supposedly endorsed my exclusion. As being in my own best interests, my preferences were being assumed and decided for me, eliminating any need for my parents to feel guilty about their decision. And if I said I wanted to attend anyway, the question seemed to catch her off guard. Well, Marcus, I really don't think that would be wise. These people are used to a certain level of conversation and social grace. They discuss international travel, wine collections, art acquisitions. It's not that we don't love you, dear, but you've always been more practical than sophisticated. There it was, the fundamental assumption that had shaped my family's treatment of me for decades. In their minds, I was inherently limited by my practical nature, incapable of the refinement required for a truly elevated company. My technical career wasn't seen as intellectually demanding, but rather as blue-collar work that happened to involve computers, so my presence would somehow diminish. The quality of the gathering? It's not about diminishing anything, Marcus. It's about ensuring that everyone can enjoy themselves without having to adjust their conversation to accommodate different backgrounds and interests. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with my mother repeatedly circling back to themes of my supposed comfort, their guests' expectations, and the importance of maintaining appropriate social standards. Each explanation reinforced the central message. I didn't belong among successful people because I wasn't truly successful myself. After hanging up, I sat in my executive office surrounded by awards, industry recognition, and technology that was protecting billions of dollars in assets worldwide. The view from my 42nd floor window encompassed most of Hartford, including the neighborhoods where several of my parents' Easter guests lived and worked. The contrast between my actual life and my family's perception of it had never been more stark. I spent the weekend researching each person on the guest list, not out of vindictiveness, but from genuine curiosity about how my family had misjudged the situation. Jonathan Pierce had quoted me in a speech about cybersecurity challenges facing the banking industry. Dr. Foster had implemented security protocols I had personally designed for her practice. Harrison Blackwell's company had paid Tech Global over $2 million for consulting services I had led. These weren't just random, wealthy people who happened to move in elevated social circles. They were professionals whose businesses depended on the kind of expertise I provided. Several of them had my direct phone number and had consulted with me about sensitive security matters affecting their companies and clients. The research revealed something else entirely. My parents' social ascension wasn't as secure as they believed. Reading trade publications and business news, I learned that several companies represented at their Easter gathering were facing significant financial challenges. The luxury car dealership was struggling with declining sales. The law firm had lost several major clients. Even David's pharmaceutical connections were dealing with regulatory difficulties that threatened their market position. My family was so focused on appearances and social climbing that they had missed the underlying economic realities affecting their new social circle. They were desperate to maintain acceptance among people whose own positions were increasingly precarious, while simultaneously rejecting their son, who had achieved exactly the kind of sustainable success they claimed to value. Monday morning brought a series of meetings that would prove relevant to my situation in ways I couldn't have anticipated. Tech Global's executive team was discussing a major acquisition opportunity, a struggling technology company that owned several valuable patents but lacked the resources to develop them effectively. The company's financial difficulties created an opportunity for us to acquire significant intellectual property at a fraction of its actual value. During the due diligence process, I learned that the acquisition target owned the property management software used by several local organizations, including St. Augustine Episcopal Church, where my family worshiped. The church had been struggling with outdated systems and increasing cybersecurity concerns, making them an ideal candidate for the technology upgrade that would follow our acquisition. The possibility began forming in my mind, not as revenge, but as an opportunity to demonstrate reality in a way that my family couldn't ignore or rationalize away. If they were determined to judge worth by social position and financial capacity, perhaps it was time to reveal exactly where I stood in those hierarchies. That evening, I called my college roommate, Jake Morrison, who had become a successful real estate attorney specializing in religious and nonprofit property transactions. Jake had maintained connections throughout Connecticut's religious community and had handled several high-profile church acquisitions in recent years. "Marcus, good to hear from you. How's the tech world treating you? Can't complain." "Actually, I'm calling because I need some information about church property law and acquisition procedures. Hypothetically speaking, what would be involved in purchasing a church building and property?" Jake's expertise was exactly what I needed. Churches, he explained, were often struggling financially, despite appearing prosperous to their congregations. Property maintenance, insurance costs, declining membership created financial pressures that many religious organizations couldn't sustain. When churches faced serious financial difficulties, they sometimes considered selling their property to developers or private investors, who could maintain the building's historical character while providing the congregation with funds to relocate or merge with other churches. "Are you thinking about getting into religious real estate?" Jake asked. "Because if you are, there are some interesting opportunities in Connecticut right now. Several churches are quietly exploring their options due to financial pressures." That conversation planted the seed of an idea that would change everything. My family wanted to measure worth by wealth and social position. I was prepared to provide a demonstration they would never forget. The question wasn't whether I could afford to make a dramatic statement, but whether I was ready to fundamentally alter my relationship with my family in pursuit of truth they had spent decades avoiding. The next morning, I called Jake back with a very specific question. "Tell me about St. Augustine Episcopal Church in Westfield. What do you know about their financial situation?" Jake's pause was telling. "That's interesting you ask. I've heard through professional channels that they're dealing with some serious structural issues. The building is over a century old, and they need major renovations to bring it up to current safety codes. Word is they're looking at a 7-figure repair bill they can't afford. My family's church, the very symbol of their social respectability and religious devotion, was in a financial crisis. The Gothic Revival building, with its impressive stone facade and soaring bell tower, had been central to Westfield's social hierarchy for generations. Membership in St. Augustine wasn't just about worship, it was about belonging to Connecticut's established social order. "Jake, I need you to make some discreet inquiries. If St. Augustine were considering selling, what would be the process? And more importantly, what kind of timeline would we be looking at?" "Marcus, are you serious about this?" Church acquisitions are complex, especially when you're dealing with historical properties and established congregations. I explained that timing was critical and that I had resources available to expedite any necessary procedures. Jake's expertise in religious property law made him the perfect intermediary, and his reputation in Connecticut's legal community would lend credibility to any offer we presented. "Give me 48 hours, Jake said. I'll reach out to some contacts and see what kind of situation they're really facing." While Jake investigated, I began preparing for what would either be the most expensive lesson I'd ever taught or the most dramatic gesture of my life. The Tech Global acquisition had provided me with liquid assets that most people couldn't comprehend, and my investment portfolio had grown to the point where purchasing a historic church would represent a significant but manageable expense. Wednesday evening brought Jake's report, delivered over dinner at a quiet restaurant where we could speak without interruption. "Marcus, St. Augustine is in worse shape than I initially thought. They need $2.3 million for essential structural repairs. Their annual operating budget is running a $400,000 deficit. The diocese has given them 6 months to develop a sustainability plan, or they'll be forced to merge with another congregation and sell the property. The church leadership had been hiding their financial difficulties from the congregation, maintaining appearances while desperately seeking solutions behind the scenes. My parents, despite their prominent involvement in church activities, had no idea how precarious the situation had become. What would it take to make an acquisition offer they couldn't refuse? I asked. Jake outlined the process. An initial approach would need to come through proper church hierarchy channels, demonstrating serious intent and adequate resources. The offer would need to address both the congregation's immediate financial needs and their long-term concerns about the building's future use and historical preservation. If you're really considering this, Jake said, I'd recommend an offer around $4.5 million so that covers their debt, provides relocation funds, and creates an endowment for their new facility. It's generous enough to get immediate attention from church leadership and the diocese. $4.5 million. The amount was staggering by most standards, but entirely manageable given my financial position. More importantly, it would send an unmistakable message about my actual capabilities and resources. Thursday morning, I authorized Jake to make preliminary contact with St. Augustine's vestry, the lay leadership body responsible for the church's temporal affairs. The approach was carefully crafted to appear professional and respectful while demonstrating serious financial capacity. Jake presented me as a successful technology executive with deep Connecticut roots and an interest in historic preservation. The response came within hours. Church leadership requested an immediate meeting to discuss the proposal, revealing just how desperate their situation had become. We scheduled the meeting for Friday afternoon, exactly 1 week before my family's Easter celebration. The St. Augustine vestry meeting took place in the church's historic conference room. Surrounded by portraits of past rectors and prominent parishioners, 5 vestry members attended, along with Father Michael Harrison, the rector who had officiated at Victoria's wedding. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was negotiating to purchase the building where my family had celebrated their most important milestones. Mr. Thompson, Father Harrison began, your attorney has outlined a very generous proposal. Before we proceed, I need to understand your intentions for the property. St. Augustine has been central to this community for over a century. Prepared carefully for this question, Father, I understand the building's significance to Westfield's community and history. My intention would be to preserve its architectural integrity, while potentially allowing continued religious use by the congregation under a long-term lease arrangement. The property would be maintained as a historic landmark, not converted to commercial use. The vestry members exchanged glances that confirmed Jake's assessment of their financial desperation. My offer represented salvation from an impossible situation, allowing them to maintain their community presence while eliminating the crushing debt that threatened their existence. The diocese would need to approve any sale, added Helen Morrison, the senior warden, but given our current circumstances, I believe they would view your proposal very favorably. Jake handled the technical details while I observed the dynamics in the room. These were the same people who had watched my family's social ascension with approval, who had celebrated Victoria's marriage to David as a triumph for prominent church families. Now they were negotiating with the son they had seen as an afterthought. The practical younger child who worked with computers, the preliminary agreement was reached within 2 hours, pending diocesan approval and legal due diligence. St. Augustine Episcopal Church would accept my offer of $4.5 million for their property. With closing scheduled for the Wednesday after Easter, the congregation would receive a generous lease, allowing them to continue worshiping in the building while they plan their transition to a new facility. Mr. Thompson, Father Harrison said. As we concluded, I have to ask, are you related to Richard and Patricia Thompson? They're very active in our parish. Yes, they're my parents, I replied. I look forward to discussing this development with them very soon. The weekend passed in surreal normalcy. My parents called with updates about Easter preparations, excitedly. Describing the elegant table settings and gourmet menu they had planned for their sophisticated guests, they remained completely unaware that their son had just agreed to purchase the church where they worshipped, where they had been married, and where they derived much of their social standing. Monday brought the formal documentation. Jake's office prepared purchase agreements, financial verification documents, and correspondence with the Episcopal Diocese of Connecticut. My bank provided proof of funds showing liquid assets far exceeding the purchase price, eliminating any questions about my ability to complete the transaction. The diocese's approval came Tuesday morning, accompanied by effusive gratitude for my commitment to historic preservation and continued religious use of the property. Bishop Catherine Wells personally called to express the church's appreciation for my extraordinary generosity in preserving this sacred space for future generations. Tuesday evening, I received the text message that had started this entire journey. The photo of my family's Easter celebration, with a caption about those who truly understand our values, arrived while I was reviewing final purchase documents. For the church where that very celebration would take place, the irony was perfect. My parents were hosting their sophisticated gathering at a home purchased with money from real estate development, celebrating in a church they had no idea their poor son now owned, surrounded by guests who either knew me professionally or worked for companies that depended on my expertise. Wednesday morning brought the closing. Jake and I met at the law offices of Morrison, Bradford, and Associates, where the final paperwork was executed with remarkable efficiency. The wire transfer of $4.5 million cleared within hours, making me the owner of one of Connecticut's most historic religious properties. "Congratulations," Jake said as we shook hands outside the law office. "You now own the church where your parents worship. What exactly are you planning to do with this information?" That question had been weighing on me since Monday. The purchase wasn't about revenge or humiliation, though both elements were undeniably present. It was about truth, about forcing a reckoning with decades of assumptions and dismissals that had shaped my family's treatment of me. "I'm going to let them discover it naturally," I told Jake. "No dramatic announcements or confrontations. It's just reality, presented in a way they can't ignore or rationalize away." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would attend church on Easter Sunday, sitting in the same pew where my family had worshipped for decades, listening to Father Harrison deliver his sermon in a building I now owned. The revelation would come gradually, through conversations with other parishioners, and eventually through official church communications about the ownership change. Thursday brought an unexpected call from Father Harrison. "Marcus, I wanted to discuss the Easter service with you. Given your new relationship with the church, would you prefer special seating or acknowledgement during the service?" "Actually, Father, I'd prefer to keep the ownership transition quiet until after Easter. My family will be attending the service, and I think it would be better for them to learn about this development through normal church communications rather than public announcements." Father Harrison understood immediately, of course. "We'll handle the transition discreetly, although I should mention that several vestry members are quite excited about sharing the news of our church's salvation. It may be difficult to keep this completely confidential." That was exactly what I was hoping for. The news would spread naturally through the congregation, reaching my parents through the very social networks they valued so highly. Their sophisticated Easter guests, many of whom were also St. Augustine parishioners, would gradually become aware that the church's financial rescue had come from the son they had excluded for being too poor. Friday afternoon brought a call from my mother, her voice bubbling with excitement about the weekend's plans. "Marcus, darling, everything is ready for tomorrow's celebration. I'm so sorry you can't join us, but I know you understand. We're serving champagne before dinner, and David has selected some wonderful wines from his collection. It's going to be absolutely perfect." "I'm sure it will be memorable," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "Are you still planning to attend Easter service at St. Augustine?" "Of course. We always sit in our usual pew, third row on the right. Father Harrison is giving a special sermon about resurrection and renewal. It should be quite inspiring, especially with all our distinguished guests in attendance." Sunday morning arrived with perfect spring weather, the kind of bright, clear Easter morning that made St. Augustine's stained glass windows glow like jewels. One arrived early, taking a seat several rows behind my family's usual location. the church filled with its typical Easter crowd, including several faces I recognized from my mother's guest list. My parents entered with Victoria, David, and their assembled company of sophisticated guests. They moved down the aisle with the confidence of established parishioners, nodding to acquaintances and settling into their reserved seating area. The irony of their proprietary attitude toward a building I now owned was almost overwhelming. Father Harrison's sermon focused on themes of unexpected revelation and divine providence, words that seemed particularly appropriate given the circumstances. As he spoke about how God's plans often unfold in ways that surprise and humble us, I noticed several vestry members glancing in my direction with knowing smiles. The revelation began during the coffee hour that followed the service. The coffee hour at St. Augustine traditionally took place in Fellowship Hall, a spacious room adjacent to the main sanctuary where parishioners gathered after Sunday service to socialize and connect. Easter Sunday's gathering was particularly well attended, with the combination of regular congregants and visiting family members creating a bustling atmosphere of conversation and celebration. I positioned myself near the coffee station, watching. As my parents moved through the crowd with their distinguished guests, my mother was clearly in her element, introducing David's business associates to prominent church members and basking in the reflected glory of their social connections. Victoria, radiant in her pregnancy, received congratulations and attention from seemingly every person in the room. The first crack in their perfect morning came when Margaret Sutherland, one of my mother's country club friends and a longtime St. Augustine vestry member, approached my parents' group with barely contained excitement. "Patricia, Richard, you'll never believe the wonderful news we received this week," Margaret announced, her voice carrying across the nearby conversations. "Our church has been saved by the most generous benefactor a local businessman purchased the entire property and is allowing us to continue worshiping here while we plan our new facility." My mother's face brightened with interest. "How wonderful. Anyone we know?" "Actually, yes," Margaret replied, her eyes scanning the room. "Young Marcus Thompson, Richard's son. Can you imagine? He purchased the church for $4.5 million. $4.5 million. We had no idea he was so successful." The color drained from my father's face so quickly, I thought he might need medical attention. My mother's expression shifted, from polite interest to complete confusion, as if Margaret had suddenly begun speaking a foreign language. "I'm sorry," my mother said slowly. "I think there might be some mistake. Our Marcus works with computers. He couldn't possibly afford... ... "No, there's no mistake," Margaret continued enthusiastically. "Father Harrison showed us all the documentation. Marcus is apparently some kind of technology executive. It's very high level according to the paperwork. The diocese is absolutely thrilled with his commitment to historic preservation." David, who had been listening with growing bewilderment, interjected, "Are we talking about the same Marcus Thompson, Patricia's son, who drives the old Honda?" "The very same," confirmed Helen Morrison, the senior warden, who had joined the conversation. "Although I suspect that car choice might be more about personal preference than financial necessity. Anyone who can write a check for $4.5 million isn't worried about car payments." The ripple effect was immediate and devastating. Jonathan Pierce, the banking executive my mother had been so eager to impress, stepped forward. With a knowing smile, "Wait, are you talking about Marcus Thompson from Tech Global? The cybersecurity guy?" My father nodded mutely, clearly unable to process what he was hearing. "I've worked with Marcus on several occasions," Jonathan continued. "His security protocols protect half the financial institutions in New England. He's considered one of the leading experts in the field. Very impressive guy, actually. I had no idea he was local." Dr. Amanda Foster, another of my parents' carefully curated guests, overheard the conversation and joined in. "Marcus Thompson, he designed the security systems for my medical practice. Brilliant work. I heard he testified before Congress about cybersecurity threats. Is he here today?" Today, Harrison Blackwell, David's business partner, looked around the room with new interest. Marcus Thompson, who was featured in Fortune magazine. The guy who prevented that massive cyber attack last year? He's your son? Each revelation hit my parents like a physical blow. Their sophisticated guests, the very people they had excluded me from meeting because I supposedly lacked the refinement to contribute to elevated conversations, were not only familiar with my work, but held me in professional esteem that bordered on reverence. My mother attempted damage control. Well, yes, Marcus has always been very technical. We're proud of his computer work. Of course, but we had no idea, computer work. Dr. Foster interrupted with a laugh. Patricia, your son runs cybersecurity for one of the largest technology companies in the world. He manages budgets larger than most cities and consults with government agencies about national security. That's not computer work. That's executive leadership at the highest level. Victoria, who had been standing silently throughout this conversation, finally found her voice. But he lives in that little house in Hartford, drives an old car. He doesn't act like he has money. Richard Worthington, the restaurant owner, nodded approvingly. Smart man. Real wealth doesn't need to advertise itself. The most successful people I know often live surprisingly modest lifestyles. It's the ones trying to impress you who usually don't have as much as they want you to think. The comment landed like a guided missile. Everyone in the group understood exactly what Worthington was implying about people who felt the need to display their success through conspicuous consumption and social climbing. Father Harrison, who had been observing the conversation from a distance, approached the group with perfect timing. You've all learned about our wonderful benefactor. Marcus has been incredibly generous, not just with his financial support, but with his vision for preserving this historic building. He specifically requested that the congregation be able to continue worshiping here during our transition period. Mother's voice was barely a whisper. He bought the church, saved the church, Father Harrison corrected gently. We were facing potential closure due to structural repairs we couldn't afford. Marcus's purchase ensures that St. Augustine will continue serving this community for generations to come. It's truly a blessing. The conversation continued around them, with each guest sharing additional details about my professional reputation and achievements. The picture that emerged was of someone operating at the highest levels of the technology industry. Someone whose expertise was sought by Fortune 500 companies and government agencies alike. David pulled my father aside, his voice low but still audible to nearby listeners. Richard, how did you not know any of this? Marcus is apparently worth tens of millions of dollars, be hundreds of millions. How is that possible? My father's response revealed the depth of his confusion and denial. He never told us. He lives like he doesn't have money. How were we supposed to know? Jonathan Pierce, overhearing the exchange, offered insight that cut to the heart of the matter. Richard, successful people don't usually announce their wealth to family members who might have expectations or requests. And frankly, truly confident individuals don't need external validation of their achievements. Your son seems to have figured out something many wealthy people never learn, that your worth isn't determined by what you own or how others perceive you. The group began to disperse as the coffee hour wound down, but not before several more revelations emerged. Dr. Foster mentioned consulting with me about medical data security just the previous month. Harrison Blackwell revealed that his company had been trying to hire me as a consultant for over a year, offering compensation packages that would have shocked my parents if they'd understood the numbers involved. Margaret Sutherland delivered the final blow to my parents' assumptions. You know, Patricia, you should be incredibly proud. Marcus could have purchased any property as an investment, but he chose to save our church. That speaks to character and community commitment that money can't buy. As the guests prepared to leave for my parents' Easter dinner, the dynamic had shifted completely. Instead of my family hosting impressive people who might elevate their social standing, they were suddenly the parents of the most accomplished person in the room, someone whose achievements dwarfed those of everyone present. The ride back to my parents' house must have been excruciating. I imagined the awkward silence as they processed the complete inversion of their worldview. While their guests discussed my accomplishments and speculated about the wealth required to purchase a historic church on a whim, I didn't attend there. Easter dinner, obviously. But I learned later that the conversation throughout the meal focused heavily on my unexpected prominence. Their sophisticated guests peppered them with questions about my background, my education, and my career trajectory. My parents found themselves in the uncomfortable position of admitting they knew almost nothing about their son's professional life or financial situation. The most painful moment, according to Victoria's later account, came when one guest mentioned, "Reading my interview in a cybersecurity trade publication about the work-life balance challenges facing technology executives. When asked about my personal life and relationships, my parents realized they couldn't answer basic questions about my interests, my social circle, or my romantic relationships. They had been so focused on dismissing my achievements that they had completely failed to learn who I actually was as a person." That evening, my phone began ringing with calls from family members. My father's voicemails progressed from confused to angry to pleading. My mother's messages were tearful attempts to understand how such a massive misunderstanding could have occurred. Victoria's texts were the most interesting, shifting from accusations of deliberate deception to grudging acknowledgement that maybe she had misjudged my situation. I didn't respond to any of them immediately. The revelation had served its purpose, forcing my family to confront the reality they had spent years denying. But the more important question was what would happen next. Would they be capable of genuine reflection and change, or would they simply adjust their treatment of me based on my newly revealed wealth while maintaining the same fundamental attitudes that had created our dysfunction? The answer to that question would determine whether our family relationships could be salvaged, or whether this Easter Sunday had marked the end of my attempts to maintain connections with people who had never truly seen me for who I was. The church purchase had been about more than shocking my family. It had been about forcing a moment of truth that could either heal our relationships or reveal them to be irreparably damaged by decades of willful blindness and social climbing. Either way, I would never again allow myself to be dismissed, underestimated, or excluded based on other people's assumptions about my worth or capabilities. The lessons of Easter Sunday 2024 would reshape not just my family dynamics, but my understanding of authenticity, success, and the courage required to demand respect from those who should have offered it unconditionally. The silence lasted exactly 3 days before my father showed up at my office building, unannounced. Tech Global's security desk called to inform me that Richard Thompson was in the lobby, requesting to see me urgently. I had him escorted to my executive conference room, where he sat dwarfed by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Hartford's skyline. When I entered, my father stood awkwardly, clearly intimidated by the corporate environment that represented everything he had failed to understand about my life. His eyes took in the awards on the walls, the view that commanded respect throughout Connecticut's business community, and the casual confidence with which I moved through a space that was unmistakably mine. "Marcus," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "we need to talk." I gestured for him to sit at the polished conference table where I had negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts and consulted with government officials about national security. The irony of having this conversation in a room where his son was recognized as an industry leader wasn't lost on either of us. "I'm listening," I said simply. "How long?" he asked. "How long have you been like this?" The question revealed everything about his mindset. Success, in his understanding, was something you either possessed or didn't. It's not something you built through years of dedicated work and strategic decisions. He couldn't comprehend that I had been like this for years while he dismissed my achievements as mere computer work. "Dad, I've been building toward this for over a decade. The signs were all there, but you chose not to see them. Every promotion, every recognition, every industry award, I tried to share these things with you. But they never seemed to matter because they didn't fit your definition of success." He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "But why didn't you? Tell us about the money, about buying the church." "When would I have told you?" "During the phone call where Mom explained that I was too unsophisticated to dine with your Easter guests? Or maybe during one of the many conversations where you dismissed my career as technical support?" The words hung in the air between us, carrying the weight of decades of accumulated frustration and disappointment. My father's face reflected a man confronting the reality that he had fundamentally misjudged his own son for most of his adult Life, your mother is devastated, he said finally. She can't understand how we got this so wrong. She got it wrong because she never tried to get it right. You both made assumptions about my life and capabilities, then filtered every piece of contradictory evidence through those assumptions. When Fortune magazine profiled me, you didn't see a successful executive, you saw someone getting lucky. In a field you didn't respect? The conversation continued for over an hour, with my father struggling to reconcile his perception of me with the reality he could no longer deny. He asked about my salary, my responsibilities, my industry recognition, as if learning these facts could somehow repair the years of dismissal and exclusion. "What do you want from us now?" he asked eventually. It was the wrong question, revealing that he still didn't understand the fundamental issue. This wasn't about what I wanted from them. It was about their inability to see value in anything that didn't conform to their narrow social expectations. I want you to understand that respect isn't something you give conditionally based on wealth or social status. I want you to recognize that you excluded me from Easter not because I lacked sophistication, but because you were embarrassed by what you assumed about my circumstances. The following weeks brought a parade of family members attempting to rebuild relationships they had never properly valued. My mother visited my home for the first time in years, walking through rooms filled with artwork and furnishings that reflected both taste and financial means. Her shock at discovering that I lived well was almost comical. Considering she had spent decades assuming I struggled financially, Victoria's approach was more calculating. She arrived with David ostensibly to apologize, but clearly hoping to repair relationships that might prove professionally beneficial to her husband's business connections. The conversation revealed how thoroughly my family had misunderstood not just my financial situation, but my character. "Marcus, if we had known you were so successful, things would have been different," Victoria said, as if this admission somehow made the years of dismissal more acceptable. "That's exactly the problem," I replied. "Your treatment of me should never have been based on your assessment of my net worth. The fact that you're only reconsidering our relationship now that you know I have money proves that you still don't understand what went wrong." The transformation in my family's behavior was immediate and comprehensive, but it felt hollow because it was driven entirely by revised assumptions about my wealth rather than genuine recognition of my worth as a person. Suddenly, my opinions were sought on financial matters. My career advice was valued. My presence was considered essential at family gatherings. The church purchase had achieved its intended effect of forcing a reckoning, but it also revealed the transactional nature of my family's affection. They were capable of adjusting their treatment based on new information about my resources, but incapable of examining the fundamental attitudes that had created our dysfunction in the first place. 6 months after Easter, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I donated ownership of St. Augustine back to the diocese, with an endowment ensuring its preservation and continued operation. The gesture wasn't about the money, it was about demonstrating that wealth should be a tool for meaningful action, not a weapon for settling personal scores. Father Harrison called the donation an act of profound generosity that reflects the highest Christian values, but I saw it differently. Keeping the church would have meant holding on to a symbol of my family's misplaced priorities, allowing their newfound respect to remain conditional on my financial capacity. The experience taught me that some relationships cannot be salvaged, no matter how dramatically you demonstrate your worth. My parents' love had always been conditional, based on their assessment of my value according to criteria they respected. Changing those criteria didn't transform the relationship. It simply revealed its irrational nature. My relationship with Victoria evolved differently. The shock of discovering my success forced her to confront her own complicity in our family's dynamic. She began therapy, started asking genuine questions about my life and interests, and slowly worked to build a connection based on mutual respect rather than assumptions about social hierarchy. "I realize now that I never really knew you," she admitted during one of our new regular coffee meetings. "I was so comfortable being the favorite that I never questioned whether our parents' treatment was fair, or whether you might have accomplished things I didn't understand." The professional world offered validation that my family had never provided. Industry colleagues respected my expertise. Government officials sought my consultation, and major corporations competed for my services. These relationships were built on demonstrated competence rather than inherited status or social connections. I found myself mentoring young professionals from backgrounds similar to mine, people whose achievements were dismissed by families focused on traditional markers of success. The technology industry was filled with brilliant individuals whose worth was measured in code quality and problem-solving ability rather than country club memberships or charity board positions. A year after the Easter revelation, I established the Thompson Foundation for Technology Education, focusing on providing opportunities for students from families who might not understand or support careers in emerging fields. The Foundation's mission reflected my understanding that respect and support should be based on potential and character, rather than conformity to established social expectations. The church purchase had been expensive, but it was the most valuable investment I ever made. Not financially, but in terms of personal freedom and self-respect. It forced me to stop seeking validation from people who were incapable of providing it and to start building relationships with those who could see my actual value. My parents and I maintain cordial contact now, but our relationship remains fundamentally changed. They treat me with a respect that feels performative rather than genuine, based on their revised understanding of my financial capacity rather than recognition of their past mistakes. The damage done by decades of conditional love cannot be repaired by belated acknowledgement of success. The most important lesson wasn't about money or social status, but about the courage required to demand authentic relationships. Too many people spend their lives accepting diminished treatment from family members who claim to love them while consistently demonstrating the opposite through their actions. If you're living this story, if you're the family member whose achievements are dismissed, whose worth is measured by standards that seem designed to exclude you, whose presence is treated as optional while others are considered essential, understand that you have more power than you realize. You don't need to purchase a church to prove your worth, but you do need to stop accepting treatment that diminishes your value. Real love doesn't come with conditions about wealth, career, prestige, or social status. Real respect doesn't require you to prove yourself repeatedly to the same people who refuse to see your worth. The Easter when I wasn't invited because I was too poor became the Easter when I learned that I was rich enough to buy the church where my family worshipped. But more importantly, it became the day I stopped seeking approval from people who had proven themselves incapable of offering genuine love. Sometimes, the most powerful response to exclusion isn't anger or revenge, it's the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and refusing to accept anything less than authentic relationships. The church was just a building, but the freedom to demand respect was priceless. Your worth isn't determined by other people's recognition of it, but your happiness depends on surrounding yourself with people who can see and appreciate who you really are, rather than who they think you should be. That Easter taught me that family isn't defined by blood, it's defined by respect, support, and unconditional love. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept anything less than you deserve, even from the people who should have offered it freely from the beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.